The village sat quietly on the edge of the world, where the green hills met the sky, and the wind whispered secrets only the earth knew. It was a place forgotten by time, where the rhythm of life had slowed, and the only thing that seemed to remain unchanged was the old man who lived at the end of the road. His name was Samuel, though no one called him that anymore. To the village children, he was Old Man Samuel, or the Hermit, a name that carried with it the weight of isolation, of years lived in the shadow of a past that had long been erased by the seasons. Samuel had once been a vibrant man, full of dreams and laughter. He had a wife, a daughter, and a small farm. But that was many years ago, and the world he knew had shifted beyond recognition. His wife, Claire, passed away from illness, and his daughter Emily left for the city, leaving him alone with nothing but the quiet murmur of the wind and the occasional visit from a neighbor with pity in their eyes. Now, he sat in a small rocking chair on the porch of his weathered cottage, staring out at the horizon. The rocking chair creaked with each slow movement, much like the man himself. Samuel's eyes, once bright and eager, were now dimmed with age, a mirror to the solitude that enveloped him. His hair had turned a thin silver, his skin wrinkled with time's touch. He was a man who had lived long enough to see the world change, but not enough to change with it. Every day was the same. He would rise early, before the sun touched the sky, and tend to his small garden. He would go to the village to buy bread and a few other necessities, always keeping to himself, never speaking to anyone unless it was absolutely necessary. He had learned long ago that it was easier to be invisible, to blend into the background, than to try to rekindle connections that had long since faded. Yet, despite the quiet life he had carved out for himself, there were moments when the loneliness would creep in, like a cold wind that made his bones ache. On those days, he would sit by the fire, the only sound in the room the crackle of the burning wood, and wonder what had happened to the world he once knew. As the days grew shorter and autumn deepened, Samuel's routine began to feel even more monotonous. The once vibrant garden had slowed, the flowers wilting, the vegetables harvested long ago. The wind howled through the trees, and Samuel often found himself closing the windows against the chill, trying to block out the world that seemed so distant. One evening, as he sat in his rocking chair, staring at the ever-darker sky, there came a knock on the door. He was used to the silence of his home. He hadn't had visitors in years, and the thought of someone standing on the other side of the door filled him with a mixture of curiosity and dread. He rose slowly, his joints creaking as he shuffled to the door. When he opened it, he was greeted by a young woman standing in the doorway. She was bundled in a coat against the cold, her face framed by a scarf. She looked familiar, though Samuel couldn't place her at first. "Excuse me, sir," the woman said softly, her eyes searching his face. "I'm looking for Samuel." "Old Man Samuel? Are you him?" Samuel blinked in surprise. No one had called him Old Man Samuel in years, and certainly no one had come to visit him in such a long time. I'm Samuel," he replied, his voice a bit hoarse. "What do you need?" The woman smiled, though there was a sadness to it. "I'm Abigail," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm your granddaughter, Emily's daughter." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. Emily, his daughter. It had been so long since he had seen her, so long since he had heard from her. He had thought she had forgotten him. And now, her daughter stood before him, a stranger with the same eyes as her mother. Abigail's eyes softened with understanding. "I know it's been a while. I've heard stories of you from my mother. I thought I would come see you." Samuel felt a strange, unfamiliar pang in his chest. He had not seen his daughter in years, had not even received a letter from her in so long that he had assumed she had moved on, leaving him behind. To have her daughter here standing in his doorway was like a dream he didn't quite know how to embrace. Samuel invited Abigail inside, and they sat by the fire. She spoke of her life, of the city, of her mother, and of the things she had learned from her grandmother, Claire. The warmth of the fire seemed to breathe life into the small room, and Samuel found himself listening intently, the quiet ache in his heart slowly easing. Abigail told him that she had recently moved back to the village, seeking some peace from her hectic city life. She had heard stories of her grandmother and grandfather, of their life here in the quiet village, and something had drawn her to it. She had always wondered about her grandfather, and now, here she was. "I remember when I was little," she said. "Mother would tell me about the old house, and how you were always kind, always there with a smile, a story. I never met you, Grandpa, but she always spoke so fondly of you." Samuel swallowed hard, not knowing what to say. His throat felt tight. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to him like this, with such warmth, such kindness. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice thick. "I haven't been much of a grandfather. I haven't been much of anything, really." Abigail reached over, placing a hand on his. "It's okay. You don't have to apologize. I wanted to meet you." The following morning, Abigail invited Samuel to the village market. It had been years since he had seen the bustling, familiar faces of the villagers, and the thought of walking among them filled him with both a sense of dread and excitement. He hadn't realized how much he had missed the simplicity of village life until Abigail brought it up. They walked through the cobbled streets together, passing the bakery, the old pub, and the church where Samuel had once spent so many hours in the pews. There was Martha, the baker's wife, who called out to Samuel with a broad smile. There was Thomas, the blacksmith, who waved from his shop. And there was young Lily, who had grown up so fast, her once rosy cheeks now full of the hard edges of adulthood. The villagers were warm and welcoming, as they had always been. But Samuel could sense the distance. Time had passed, and many of them had moved on, just as his daughter had. They smiled at him, but it was as though they were all living in a world that no longer had room for the old man who had faded into the background. Still, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of something long buried. He had once been part of this community. He had once been more than a name on a memory. And for the first time in years, he wondered if he could find a way back. As they stopped for a cup of tea at a little cafe, Samuel turned to Abigail. "Thank you," he said, his voice a little unsteady, "for bringing me here. I didn't think I could face it again, but I'm glad I did." Abigail smiled, her eyes warm. "I think you just needed someone to remind you. We all get lost sometimes, Grandpa. But that doesn't mean we can't find our way back." Over the next several weeks, Samuel began to visit the village more often, walking the familiar paths, stopping to chat with the villagers. He didn't rush into anything, but he found himself slowly becoming part of the world again, as though the very act of living had been rekindled in him. Abigail continued to visit him, bringing small bits of news from the city and sharing her own experiences. Slowly, they grew close, the bond between them strengthening, filling the emptiness that had been Samuel's companion for so long. And then, one day, when the sun was low in the sky and the autumn leaves had all fallen from the trees, Samuel stood on his porch, staring at the horizon. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. The world was still changing, and Samuel knew he couldn't hold back time. But now, with Abigail by his side and the village around him, he no longer felt alone. In the end, Samuel realized that while the past could never be undone, there was always a way forward. And sometimes, it just took a little help to find your way back home.